Voters are casting their ballots across the UK. It's an election that could break the political deadlock over Brexit. It's also the third general election in less than 5 years. Vote counting will begin after polls close at 10 p.m. local time. That's at 6 a.m. Tomorrow morning here in Singapore and Hong Kong time as well. The party which wins a majority will decide if, how and when Britain will leave the European Union. After failing to deliver Brexit by an October 31st deadline, Mr Johnson called the snap election. He's been campaigning on a promise to get Brexit done by end January. His main rival, Jeremy Corbyn, is promising another referendum. Ollie Barrett joins us live now from London. Ollie, Mr Johnson has essentially gambled his prime ministership for this election. What's the sense he can retain power after today's vote?
There's no other way of looking at it. It is a huge gamble from Boris Johnson. The polling coming into voting day has given his Conservative Party a pretty clear lead over the opposition Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn. But with the margin of error and the unpredictability of the polls and the unpredictability of this particular election, the Conservatives cannot be complacent at all about how the result will end up. There is a very real possibility that we end up in hung Parliament territory at the same time. If the polling is correct, then Boris Johnson may well be on for that majority in Parliament that he so craves, to be able to try and deliver the Brexit deal that he has agreed with the European Union. Now, I'm joined here in London by Sophie Levin, who is a political consultant. Sophie, thank you for joining us here in London. I mean, the first place to start is the obvious one. We are standing on this roof in London. It's cold, it's wet, it's miserable. When the polls are still open later this evening, London time, it'll be dark. What kind of impact might that have on turnout? And which party benefits from a high or a low turnout, if indeed the weather does have an impact?
Yes, as you can see, it's cold, it's raining, and in a few hours it will be dark. That's why the UK tends not to have elections in December. But here we are, having one right now. I think it's unlikely to benefit any particular party. Most of the major parties have been keen on pushing out postal votes and trying to make sure people vote early when it's still light and before the rain hits. But I think it tends to not favour one party more than the other. I think if you hear on our television screens later on tonight politicians blaming the rain, blaming the wind, blaming the weather, it tends to mean that it's not going so well for them.
And talk to me about the future, because if Boris Johnson wins a majority, he will take Britain out of the European Union on January the 31st, then into trade talks with the EU. And Brexiteers have always said this is about changing Britain's place in the world, going out and doing business with countries beyond the European Union, boosting ties with the Commonwealth, boosting trade links with Asia, for example. What do you see as Britain's future place in the world if Boris Johnson does win the majority he craves?
Well, if Boris Johnson gets his majority, even if it's a small majority, the fact that the Conservative candidates have all pledged to support his withdrawal agreement means that we should see the deal that he's negotiated go through on the 31st of January. Then we enter a transition period until the end of next year, where Boris Johnson has confidently said that we will secure a free trade deal with the EU by the end of that time. During that period, we're able to negotiate trade deals with the rest of the world. And I believe the civil service has already been doing a lot of the legwork in Australia, Asia, New Zealand, a lot of those places to try and get these deals over the line. They won't come into force until afterwards. So it's whether that trade deal with the EU can be agreed by the end of next year as to whether we'll see the UK really forming those trade negotiations with the rest of the world.
And one final point, if we end up in hung Parliament territory, I mean, explain how that might play out. We could have another election?
Easily, yes. The polls, there's no clear, obvious way that we avoid a hung Parliament if the polls are to be believed, and they're all within the margin of error mostly. You could see a Johnson trying to form a minority government, perhaps relying on the support of the DUP, as he did last time, as Theresa May did last time, sorry. Or you could see Jeremy Corbyn trying to form a so-called rainbow coalition with the Scottish National Party, the Lib Dems, trying to pave some way to number 10. But as you say, another election could be round the corner if no party is able to get a clear governable majority in the near future.
Sophie, thank you very much. So, Stephen, Glenda, incredibly unpredictable here in the UK. The only thing I can predict with any certainty is that it is likely to continue to rain in many constituencies between now and the end of polling.
OK, at least one thing can be consistent, I suppose. Thanks very much for that, Ollie. Ollie Barrett speaking to us from London.